title today that I'm going to talk about, I don't think it was actually in the book, but I'm going to talk about working to understand cotton irrigation requirements by population. I think, again, I know about everybody in the room. If not, I'm Wes Porter, Extension Precision Ag Irrigation Specialist here in Tifton. And all this work's been led by Miller Hayes, and he's in the room now. But my master's student, he's planning to graduate in May, working on it. So we'll jump into a little bit of background information first, just because we've got some time. And actually, I guess so y'all know, decide if you want to stay or don't want to stay. I think I know what he's talking about. I don't know, because we've been on the road and gone too much. But my PhD student, Luke Fuhrer, is going to talk after me, I think, on machine learning and pigweed identification. So you're doing a shortened version of that, and some harvest fiber quality work. So kind of an interesting project we've had going for the past few years. But this is our most recent USDA NASS irrigation survey, and I actually updated it all the way across like the southern cotton belt the other week for a presentation I did. And so we can kind of look and see how people are scheduling irrigation currently, and I think what we see from this is overall, we're getting better in Georgia. This number has dropped a little bit over the past couple of years, but overall we're scheduling on visual observations. We've stayed relatively consistent in this survey response, at least on soil moisture sensor adoption here. You do see that some of the other states are higher. North Carolina really surprised me at 30% soil moisture sensor adoption. And besides that, when we kind of look across, we're everywhere else, calendar schedules, just we're irrigating these set number of days per week, et cetera. So kind of gives you an idea of where you stand. Where the information comes from in those states, generally across the southeastern states, extension is relatively strong. You can see especially Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, we're around the 70-75% range. You get kind of outside of that region, you see Virginia drops off pretty significantly. Tennessee is a little bit lower, and then Alabama even lower than that. And it can be interesting to see, like in Florida, there's a high number of consultants. Georgia, about 50% from consultants, which that's probably about right. I actually would expect that to be a little bit higher. I feel like most of our in-depth management in Georgia comes from consultants. And then you see our number. To me, this is kind of telling, or maybe it's a good thing. We're 75% from extension, only 17% answered from the irrigation equipment dealers, which there's none in the room, but maybe that's a good thing because it's irrigation scheduling information, right? I mean, theoretically, they're not providing that, they're selling you equipment. So, but you look in like Alabama where they're not getting information from their extension, a lot of them are getting it from equipment dealers and consultants. So either way, you take that for what it's worth. And then barriers to adoption. So this one to me is kind of a tough one. And this one from 2018 actually went up. In 2018, investing in improvements is not a priority. It was at like 32%, and that went up to 40%. So that tells me that 40% of growers that answered this survey, are saying that investing in improvements in water conservation is not a priority on their farm. Now, none of you would agree with that because you're in the irrigation talk first thing this morning, unless you came to hear only precision ag. If you did that, so maybe it's not a priority for you, but that's very tough. If we say that over a third of our growers we're not a priority on my farm right now, we have to figure out a way to change that mindset. If we're not changing that mindset, we're not going to become more water conservative. So, and the other two tied in there, which I completely understand, cannot afford or improvements won't reduce cost enough. I think we have to look now, and probably every one of you sitting in this room would agree with me because you're advanced irrigators and look at this. Our margins are so tight right now, we have to find areas that we can cut, even if it's a few bucks per acre. And irrigation, I think, is a very large opportunity for that. So these two, I hate that people have this conception or misconception of it, but we've got to do a better job educating these guys that this is an opportunity for improvement, and this is where we can go there. And that investing in improvements needs to be a priority on your farm. We could argue these values. I don't like these values. The equipped acres, irrigated acres came from the NASS survey, so those should be correct. The cotton acres, I looked online for those, and then the estimated irrigated, that's the only time I've ever used ChatGPT, so I don't know if I believe it or not. Y'all can tell me what you think. I don't think so. It gave me a lot of 35% for like all the way across, and I was like, I don't think that's true. So maybe it's general irrigated acres in the state, which may be true, and I think what happens like in a state like Georgia, we end up with a lot of crops like forages that are counted as a crop that are not irrigated, right? So that pushes that down. But if we talk about cotton specifically, I generally estimate that I think we're around 50 to 60% depending on year and rotation in cotton. And I think peanuts falls in that range too. Corn, we're probably closer to 90%. 85, 90% depending on region, et cetera. And then soybeans, I don't have a good idea, but I'm assuming soybeans is probably at like 30 or 40% there. But this one, what I really want you guys to look at is our equipped or irrigated acres. I don't think that matters. To me, that's kind of a little confusing. It's like we're not irrigating all the acres that we could be. But when we look across the southeast and we look at these states, you know, a state like Alabama, they're irrigating 170,000 acres. Very, very low to me. We go down to North Carolina, 175, South Carolina, 220, Tennessee, 200, and then Virginia, 61. But look at us in Florida and Georgia. And then we wonder, you know, our crop production, some of our issues and what's going on. We're at basically 1.3 million in Georgia, 1.5 million acres of irrigated land in Florida. And a lot of those acreages of land actually fit like right in this, across the coastal plains belt and right in North Florida. You'd agree. I actually saw a map yesterday at a talk I was at in Mississippi that showed movement of irrigated acres. And this really surprised me. There's been a lot of irrigated acres reduced out of Central Florida. I guess that shouldn't surprise me. We know why that is. We know what's happening in Central Florida, and moved to Northern Florida and moved to our region, moved to the Mississippi Alluvial Valley, right? And so we've seen heavy intensification in those regions and stuff moving from far western U.S. to our region. So again, we're heavily irrigated. Cost of pumping, these are the updated numbers. Y'all look at these have changed. If you've not seen my talk yet this year, you may not have these changed since last year. Electric went up $1 per acre inch. That's the first time in 10 years that electric has changed. So it's up. Diesel did drop $4 per acre inch from last year for what that's worth. Maybe fuel prices will continue to go down in the next couple of years. We can hope. But that puts us, I mean, again, those of you who heard me talk, you use this value how you want. Look on your farm, how many acres are you irrigating on your farm? Take your percentage. I did a 50-50 split. I think we're probably closer to 60% electric, 40% diesel across the state, but you split it how it is on your farm, use those values, and then based on your crops, I don't know if you got records. I'm not picking on Daniel. He knows what he irrigated on every farm. They do good, right? And that's not a picking. That's a little like applause for them. He can go and plug this in and get a very quick, and you may even have done it yourself on your farm, but you know what you're spending. And the deal is we need to know what we're spending on irrigation, because if we're going back to answer 1 or 2 on that, why are we not adopting, or barriers to adoption, we're saying it's not a priority or I can't afford it. And then if I ask you, well, you said you can't afford it and you don't know what you're spending on irrigation, well, that's number 1 right there. That means that you're not doing a good job calculating where it needs to be. And I guarantee you're spending a lot more on irrigation than you realize. And that's what kind of scares me. You know, in this case, 500 acres, 10 inches, that's $60,000 that we spent. Now we better be getting the return off that $60,000. If we're not, we've just sunk a lot of investment into the ground that we're not getting back out of. And I'm going to show you some of that in a minute.
Excuse me, you're $8 and $16 an acre. What are you counting in that? Are you getting
good
equipment depreciation?
Yes, that's a very good question. We're counting cost of operation, so your time, which is worth nothing, right, Adrian? You don't pay yourself anything, right? So you don't calculate that in, but we calculate that in at a rate. We calculate machinery depreciation into that, and then average cost. So since you asked that question, I'm gonna go a little bit deeper. I generally poll, and y'all can speak up or not if you want, but I kind of ask, hey, do any of y'all calculate on your farm? And if so, where do you get? I've heard from lowest, and this is a very, very strange specific case, just under $4 per acre inch for electric. Now, in this case, it was like 1 entry panel, VFD pumps, like premier setup, all right? Somehow avoided rate schedules, all this stuff. I've heard up to $7, $8 per acre inch for electric. And then diesel, they say that those values seem to be kind of on par. And it's harder to track diesel, I hate to say it, but when you get busy in the middle of the season, you got your diesel tank and you're running around refilling, and you're like, all right, how much should I put in here? How much should I put in here? And then before you know it, yes, I just did 500 gallons of fuel, but what went where? You know, and that is tough to mark. So, but yes, this one theoretically is a little high, but you also need to keep in mind, this is average across wells. Larger well, deeper well, on electric or diesel is going to take a little bit more energy to pull, right? So again, good question though.
Is there a way that we can like put in the cost for the diesel to see, because that's pretty volatile.
I think so. In these spreadsheets, you can go in, and the irrigated budgets at the bottom, you can go in and put them in and play with your numbers yourself and adjust any of the values in there to see where you're at. Yep.
Those numbers come from Amanda's spreadsheet?
Did these come from Amanda's, or these come from the irrigated ones? I think they came from hers, directly on hers. We have her enterprise production budgets here, but also, and I think these are more targeted, not this, sorry, let me clarify. all the enterprise budgets are located here. And all you really got to do is search UGA enterprise budget, right, in Google, and it'll pop them up in this link. So if you go to her enterprise budget, you can go find these values. If you go to, at the very bottom of that page, we have 4 irrigated equipment specific budgets, which are looking at what the cost of irrigation equipment is. It's a small pivot, large pivot for diesel, a small pivot, large pivot for electric. So that looks at what the cost of investment of those systems would also be on your farm. So you can go in and tweak those and play with those too. We spent a few years compiling a lot of labor cost data, a lot of pivot cost data. I can't remember if we did not put well data in that, to my knowledge, that I remember, and a few other things went into those irrigated equipment budgets. But those are fairly newly released. I think they've been out about 3 years. So keep that in mind too, that if you want to look at that it's at the very bottom of that spreadsheet also. Good questions. Cotton water requirements. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this slide or this slide, but y'all have them. And if you say you don't have them and you have a production guide, then you're lying to me. So you do have them. I will say this, I like to pick on camp because it is the very back of the production guide. I don't know where I fits in alphabetically, but I is not at the end, but it is towards the end. It's like page 170 or something. But I will tell you that when you get in the production guide, you look at that, there's been some questions that have been asked of me of producers about, hey, when I'm using the checkbook, how do I find soil infiltration information, or how do I find soil water holding capacity? Guess what? Every bit of that is in this chapter. It tells you how to take this checkbook and look at your soil type and calculate how many days to irrigation. So if you're just saying, I got this rainfall and I'm minusing off my weekly use, you're not doing yourself necessarily justice, right? You need to account for your soil information. I do have all that listed in there. And if you ever get to that and you have a question about it, call your agent first, of course. That's what I've got to tell you to do, and that's what you're supposed to do. But if they need more help, they'll call me. And I've done those visits, and we've talked through this stuff. So keep that in mind, all right? There's a lot of other things I could talk about here, but for sake of time and giving Luke some time, I don't want to, I'll get myself lost in the weeds, and y'all come to my county meetings and I'll give you a little bit more in-depth information on general water use for cotton. This one I'm saying specific on the population side, so let's talk about it. The main goal of this project was to determine effects of irrigation requirements on cotton by varied population levels. We picked three population levels, and our high, we went low, medium, high, and we started with our high. Well, our high to me is probably like almost a medium. I don't know if you call it a high in Georgia, but what happened in that case is we had a planter mishap. How about that? We'll just say that in year 1. And the high population was not as high as what we wanted it, and so we were saddled to it for 2 years, right? And that's fine. It's like, so this was all hand thin. It was planted around 30-something thousand population. Then when it came up, then we looked and see what's the max standing population we have, and we thinned everything down to that. So 27.5, 20, and 12.5. So that is plants per acre. That's not planted population, right? That is guaranteed plants per acre about 3 to 4 weeks after emergence. So there's where that's at. 9 treatments by 3 replications, because that's how the blocks are laid out. So that means that rain-fed replicated, or rain-fed paired with 27.5, 20, 12.5 replicated 3 times. The SI crop fit app, same way, and our sensor level, the same way. Everybody kind of follow that? It'll make really good sense when I show you the data. We scheduled irrigation daily based on the tool, and when the tool triggered, we applied 0.75 inches of irrigation. That's just what we do at that site. If you are looking at irrigation and you do less and it needs more, and it'll probably just trigger more often, or vice versa, right? But that's where we applied. And then on the 45, what we do is I've developed a spreadsheet that has a weighted average by estimated crop depth. And as the depth changes, of course, we weight deeper into the sensors, but every morning we compile the data from the sensors. When it approaches that daily average, we trigger the event and apply 0.75 to all treatments. Any questions about how that was handled from anybody? Any arguments that we're doing it wrong? None? Okay, good. All right, so 23. We've done this one 2 years. Hopefully most of y'all can see the wall down here. Planted. There's a couple important things that I'm starting to learn here about this study. I think it's going to take us to a new level, and probably have data over time to talk about this, but now we have to start isolating it. But notice we planted May 5th, harvested October 25th, and in that year we had 22 inches of rainfall. All right, so you can see our total water, you can see our total irrigation. Here's our yields, water use efficiency, and then our profits. So our profits here, I want you to look, hopefully you can see those. $7 per acre inch and 84-cent cotton. So these were for the yearly prices for cotton and for irrigation in that year. So you see 7 and 20 up there, right? So it's different for diesel. and the average annual price for cotton that year is 84 cents. I know we're begging for 84 cents to come back now, right? So that's how this was calculated, in addition to seeding rate. So as seeding rate went down, input costs for seed also went down. Does that make sense? That is embedded in these profit calculations, so that's reflected. All right, so the first thing I want to point out here that y'all need to look at is as we look at sensors, ignore some of the stuff that's behind me right now, we look at sensors and trigger by sensor, the 27.5 required 5 inches of irrigation, the 25.8, and the 12.5, 6.5. What's the first conclusion you drew from that? I see Adrian's eyes like, what in the world? Yeah, initially when I tell you we went lower population, you would not have assumed higher water requirement, would you?
You wouldn't have, but would that be based on soil being more exposed to?
Good question. Let's hold that question for about 30 seconds. That's your first. That's our first assumption too. All right. Maybe, I don't know. All right, the app, we could not irrigate differently, right? It just triggered, and of course we just do a blanket application at stand establishment on the rain fed. Anything else y'all think may have happened there? All right, let's talk about yields. So I've got to be careful when I say this. I was in Tennessee up in Memphis yesterday and the day before and talked about some of this, and so I could say whatever I wanted because Camp wasn't up there, and he didn't, none of this word got back to him. But the joke is that engineers cannot make seeding rate recommendations. So you can't go out of here and say, Wes is telling me to plant at these seeding rates, right? And go tell Camp I said that, or tell him that I'm giving you seeding rate recommendations. But what we learned from this study is a couple of things. Look at yield. When we planted, it doesn't matter which treatment. Within irrigation treatment, my highest yield was always the 20,000. So you notice we gained a little bit of yield when we went to 20,000. We lost yield, I would say, significantly when we went down in population. Gain yield, lost. Gain yield, I know it's hard to see, but lost. So I'm saying, all right, we have an opportunity potentially to back off on seeding rate some, and we're gaining yield, but you got to be really, really careful, I think, when you start dancing on the edge of this line and going beyond that. This worries me. I had a producer call me, or an agent call me, they're wanting to do, he'll drop it at a really wide spacing, and I think he was wanting to plant at 18 or 19,000 seeds per acre. And that scares me. Yeah, that scares me, because what happens if you plant at 18 or 19 and then it drops down to close to this level because you have emergence issues? I think that's what it's going to do to your yield. I'd rather plant and again, I'm not making seeding rate recommendation, but based on what we learned here, a little bit higher than that if you're wanting to go low, and ensure you don't drop too low. Either way. Then when we look at it by profitability, the same thing's kind of reflected. If you look within treatment, of course, these are going to be most profitable. And then you look across treatments, you're going to see that really, since there wasn't a lot of yield difference here, these are right there on top. These actually, the app was out profit. It did better on profit just because it yielded a little bit higher right here. And not quite as good on water use efficiency, but water use efficiency isn't always the teller either, right? This was the best water use efficiency, but still not the best profitability. So you kind of look at where those are at. So I want to go back to your answer. So this is why I don't think that's the answer. And you can't, it's hard to see with the screen in the way. We did not trigger irrigation with the sensors until right here, which falls to August the 3rd. I would hope that we had full canopy closure by then, right? Yeah, no. And the reason that is, and it's hard to see, you look at, we have well-distributed rain. We just didn't need irrigation, right? That was not a failure. Miller was mad all year. Every time he was getting close to triggering irrigation, we would get something like this. Every time. And he finally triggered the day before the stripling field day. That's the first time that and that's how I know it was August 3rd, that's the first time we irrigated that. So yeah, I don't think it was canopy closure. Initially, not knowing this, I said that too. And then I'm like, well, what in the world? And so this is where it stood. I don't see a ton of difference. We irrigated more with the app. I don't see a ton of difference between irrigation timings except for this one. We do have, what happened here? Why did they get repeated? Not sure why that happened. When we look at this is our season-long soil water tension by treatment. So to explain how this works in centibars, if you don't know, as you go up in this one, it's drier. Generally, in volumetric moisture content, when you go up, it's wetter. This one, as you go up, is drier. So let's talk about this and look at it for a minute. We look early season. We see the average and the high population ramped up really high in water use, right? And then we got a rainfall. So early season, that's starting to happen. That's our vegetative growth going into Pinhead Square. And then we move into July. The high jumped up. What's happening in early July? Flowering. We're probably the first or second week of flowering coming right in there. We would expect this. And then we move through. we see kind of, they're all kind of following each other a little bit. This was strange. The average responded or dropped from a rainfall faster than these two. These two were delayed. And then we get to the end of the season, we see the high kind of start to go up. The average lagged, but look at the low. This is what triggered it. In the season, the low took off. I know, and we saw it, wait till you see 24. It did it again at the end of the season. It's like that low population towards the end of the season. I don't know if it's finishing off a heavier bowl load or what's going on. I haven't read Miller's full conclusion, so I don't know what he thinks yet. So here's 24. Big difference in 24, two things. And I've learned a lot the past couple of days about these two things. And one is planting date. 6 days different, well, no, not 6 days, about 8 days difference, a week difference, April 29th. Rainfall, 30 inches of rainfall. All right, so that's the two things. We got a lot of rainfall and we planted earlier. I told Amilcar, what did I tell you the other day about us planting cotton since I've been down there? I don't want to plant my cotton in April anymore, do I? I've planted cotton at Stripling for 10 years, and every year that I planted in April, I've had lower yields. I figured out why. No, not necessarily, but I think what's happening our average season, and I got to give this to Kurt Majeski. He and I shared the session in Memphis. He said that over his observations, when we plant in April, we have been generally having more rainfall on that crop at bad, improper times. We've been having more rainfall early, like we've seen here, and then more rainfall in like August to September, where a little bit later crop has moved out of it. So we're either rotting more or we're putting more vegetative growth on up front, or a combination of both. Does that make sense? I'm going to study, that's my next study. I want to look at that, planting date by irrigation. Now, he gave me a really good thing to think about, and he kind of done it on farm and had some very similar results. But again, we're going to explore that. But I've observed it at Camilla. Every time I've planted in late April, my yields, well, here's what's happened to my yields. They look like what they have right here. What do y'all notice? Here, you want me to really point it out? Come down here at my irrigated yields and then go back and look at my dryland yields. Yep. Y'all have had that happen before too. That's bad to get to that. So we can go in and look here, but what we did observe was kind of the same thing we saw the previous year. These two were not different, but as we lowered the population, we applied another irrigation event to it. It required one more. We go look at yields, like I just told you, I gave it away. 1187, we come down here to the middle, where's it at? 11. So it's about 70 pounds, 60 pounds under. 1129. All of them are lower than my dryland, right? And that sucks to get to the end of the year and that to happen, you know, independent of where you're at. So that really hurt our profitability. Of course, in this particular year, rain-fed was the best place to be, wasn't it? And it is not where you want to be, where you're at. If we look at within treatments, though, it still kind of falls around that 20,000, give or take, on where our optimal yield within those are at, and we're still seeing, again, the increased water use for lower populations. This season was almost totally different. This one, we irrigated. If y'all remember this past year, it rained a lot up front, didn't it? It's probably actually good. I hate to say it, it's good. We probably planted in April, because if we hadn't have got it in by like May 4th or 5th, I don't think we'd have planted that cotton until like out here, would we? Probably till the 1st of June, because it was so wet and cool. But you notice then it got dry and hot in June, if y'all remember. And so then we needed irrigation events. Then it started raining again in July. And for these two, the average and the high, we did not require irrigation the rest of the season. The low, right towards the end of the season, at 123 or 4 days, I'd have to match that up exactly, it triggered one more event. Here's the deal. If we look at irrigation termination recommendations, generally we approach 120 days, I'm telling you guys to shut it off. We triggered, we applied it out there. I don't know if it caused, well, based on our documented data, I don't think it caused any issues, but at the same time, I don't know if we really needed that or not. But again, it's a dynamically different year. To me, it's crazy to say, hey, we didn't irrigate, and I've had other years like this. We didn't irrigate after July the 1st, basically, 60 days after planting. Soil water retention levels here, similar to what we saw before. We had about a month in, we saw a rapid ramp up right here of the high. Again, we saw that high spike very quick where the other ones kind of followed each other. If you look here, this was strange to me. The low and the high followed each other while the average kind of stayed in. You notice the low and high here. And look, the average stays down here. Look at the low and the high. And the low required that one more event, I guess, when the high kept dropping, or it required it to go down based on our sensors. But it is very strange to me that a low population is mimicking a high population out there and not an average. All right, so Miller did, and we talked about it. We wanted to collect more data off of these. And he's got some canopy heights and widths and a few other things we don't have in this presentation. It's going to be in his thesis and in the papers we work on. But one he put in here was bowl distribution by population. And so if you look at it, your blue is high, orange is average, and green is low. So what do you observe? Well, what I observe immediately is that on average, and statistically significantly so, you notice there's an A on all these, the low population had more bowls. Would anybody argue that we misinterpreted that? I would say that's probably right, because you got more space, more plant grows, more bowl load. Why was it lower yield? Well, the yield was so low that the additional bowl load was not enough to compensate for that, right? Would y'all agree with that? So that's where it's at. I think nothing else there except for we look at rot by population. This to me is a little surprising maybe that we saw the average had the highest percentage of rot. These were not significantly different, but you notice it did have a little bit higher percentage of rot. I would have thought the high, but if we talk about that high population, honestly, that's not that high. 27.5 is not that high of a population. I think if we'd have pushed that in the 30s or probably 40s like some of our neighboring states, you would have saw this go on up at that time of year, especially with some of that rainfall at the end of the season and that irrigation that was added. All right, one more to look at. And so bowl distribution, very similar, but by scheduling tool, which this is basically what we should see. We saw no significant differences by scheduling tool. Why would that matter? It shouldn't matter, I don't think, unless there's some tool that's really deriving it different. Now, percent rot, this was really unique. The app, for some reason, had the highest percentage rot in that year. We don't know why that was. I'm not sure. And then our conclusions, I've talked about all this throughout. Proper irrigation management, we can significantly increase cotton profitability. We know that. This one is I need to highlight this one. Responds negatively to ill-timed and over-applied irrigation. And what's going to happen? Yield and profit loss. We did it. I've done it in the past. Y'all have all done it accidentally. It happens. And then lower plant populations don't produce lower irrigation requirements. So what we have to be careful about if we are looking at, and the reason we started this study, I hadn't heard as much of it lately, but about 3 or 4 years ago, right, there was so much talk about ultra-wide row, different populations, skip row. I said, what does that mean if we're starting to manage water? Do we manage water any differently if we're making those changes? So far, I think you got to be careful. Are we really conserving water as we start doing some of that? I don't know if that's the case. We might be just spreading roots out and extracting water from a larger area then. So there's a trade-off in there. I think you may increase water use a little bit, but if you find that population that works well for you or that configuration, that may be fine. But don't just naturally think, I've lowered population, I'm better on water. Really no significant differences in a lot of that. And this one we talked about. We increased bowl retention, but the population wasn't high enough. All right, I think Luke's got about 20, I don't know what time we end, 20, 25 minutes. It's 8:30. You have any questions for me still? None.
What was the tool that you used? I'm zoned out. You used what was the irrigation scheduling tool?
Oh, the tools we used, we had watermark sensors on a probe, installed at 3 depths, 8, 16, and 24. I don't know if we shallowed those at all, but 8, 16, and 24. And we did a weighted average of those. And then we used the SI Crop Fit app, that smart irrigation crop fit app. So those two. Yep.
Is that a new thing?
Sort of, yes. There's SI Crop Fit. It was released in 23. Yeah, we didn't talk about it here last year because I did the different thing. It's the cotton app. It's the SI Cotton app, but what's been done is it's been merged into one app with corn, cotton, soybean, peanut. So they're all together into one main app.
Is that similar to Irrigator Pro? Yes.
It is. Yep. The biggest difference between it and Irrigator Pro is Irrigator Pro, if you run it as a soil water balance model, which you can without a soil water tension sensor or a capacitance sensor, Irrigator Pro, you have to manually enter your rainfall and irrigation data, whereas the app automatically downloads your rainfall and ET data for you.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, it does not. Let me make sure I didn't mix this up. So those are 2 different methods. We had a soil water tension probe that we compiled the data ourselves, and then we had the app. The app does nothing with the soil water tension or soil moisture data. Does that make sense? It's completely a soil water balance model that's standalone with no apping.
It's not using field data, it's using
Estimated weather data.
Yeah.
Yep, straight up.
detected rain and temperatures and stuff like that.
There you go. Yep. Mm-hmm.
It uses the data from the nearest station in the UGA weather network.
Yes, unless you put a weather station on your farm.
Okay.
Did y'all use one of yours weather stations? You have not, okay.
You can adjust the totals too.
You can.
It's all.
Yes. So if you,
Field has an inch, you can manually.
yes. And there's 5 or 6, and I always forget which ones. There's 5 or 6 weather stations that if you own one of them, you can, there's an API with it that you tell it you have that weather station. It asks you the login information. It'll auto pull that data in for that field.
I don't know how I've missed this SI tool this whole time.
I don't know.
Has it been discussed?
I feel like you can blame me because I'm your extension guy. No, seriously, but I try to put it, it's usually a slide or 2 embedded in mine, and maybe I don't do a good enough job pushing it. This day, I think, this is me personally, I think it's a really good tool that, that can be used. I think you gotta, use a little bit of caution because it's a soil water balance model is all I'll say, and get local good data. We've used it, it does really good at our research sites, and the reason that it does that, I guess you keep this on for questions. The reason it does really good for our research site is we have a weather station that is like from here to the main ballroom for most of our fields. If y'all have ever been to Stripling, you know it's on the corner right there. Yes, rainfall could vary across that field, across that 70 acres a little bit, but I just use that because closer than any of you've gotten, unless you literally have your personal weather station sitting by every field and you're logging that data. So I use it down there, and it generally is either very similar. In this case, it out yielded or right under the right under where sensors are at. For me, if I'm not doing anything right now except trying to keep up with it on my own, and that's a conversation Daniel and I had a couple years ago with it, I think it's great because now you've got a tool that keeps up with irrigation on your own. You know kind of what you're doing in the past. Now it's pointing you in a direction, and at the end of the year, it has a schedule report feature for every field, and when you send that report, it has everything that happened on that field. It is, to me, that is like, that data right there is great. Yeah. So, and that data, my understanding, will work if you've got any cost share as you're reporting for that cost share. Because it shows your daily water deficient, shows your irrigation, shows your rainfall, shows your estimated crop growth, your growing degree days. I mean, it's a ton of stuff that it gives you.
I don't have any physiology baked into it like Irrigator Pro, or is it?
Not as in-depth as Irrigator Pro. It uses a strict growing degree day model to estimate crop growth. So, Camp hates the app after last year. And I mean, he'll tell you that. And what happened last year is we had a year that was like so dynamically different where it got so cool up front, we stalled cotton out for a while. The app, even though it should have accounted for that in growing degree days, it still did not account well enough for that. It pushed it faster, and then it kind of, and the water use fell behind. Does that make sense? And there used to be a feature to change that, and there's not right now. I don't know if we're going to adjust that or not. So it's usually within about 3 to 5 days of maturity on your crop. If you're tracking it, the GDDs in the growth stage is within 3 to 5 days of matching. To me, I think all our, this is just my opinion, I think all of our research stations at a minimum should be using that for irrigation scheduling. I just think so, because then you give your researcher a report at the end of the year. I'm not saying it's Stripling because they were doing different stuff, but I think our other research stations that are doing irrigation management should have that app as a record.
Well, once you set it up at the beginning of the season, you pretty much, you know what you have to do. It's
Yeah.
just, they're giving you information.
You're tracking it and looking at it, and if you're like, well, I don't agree with this, well, then adjust it. You can go back in and play with some of your past data and adjust it to that. Yep. Yep. I'm not going anywhere for a little while, so if y'all got more questions, catch me after.
Yeah, don't worry, it's okay. It's important to get these questions out. So, good morning, y'all. My name's Luke Fuhrer. I'm Dr. Porter's PhD student now in ag engineering. And today we're going to kind of talk into some precision ag. I'm going to kind of hit some high points of some of this. I know we don't want to put y'all past the break. I know we all want to get out there and enjoy some networking and seeing people. So we're going to kind of run through these pretty quick. But kind of a scary thing that maybe some people nowadays are kind of starting to see the importance of is technology, kind of understanding the computers and what we can use them for. I know I helped David Hall yesterday on our ride back from Memphis recover his Google account. He thought I was a guru for being able to basically just bypass some security features on it, and blew his mind. And so this stuff, I mean, I get it. It's scary, it's daunting, but I think it's really, really useful. First off, some pretty easy things, of course, I think we all understand. Cotton here in the state of Georgia is incredibly important. Obviously here, huge, very huge valuation there. Acre, or what we produced, a little bit down from last year, but that's okay, still number 2 in the United States. Of course, always have to throw in Dr. Culpepper and Jeremy in there, just because working with Palmer Amaranth, I mean, that's a huge deal here for the state. As well as we're now down to 7 modes of action of chemicals that we're seeing resistance in palmer amaranth. So it's pretty scary. Usually there's been a study out or a survey put out in 22, 23, and palmer amaranth pretty much remains in that top weed when they consider it to be the most troublesome, the hardest to deal with, something along those lines. Kind of an interesting point. And then, of course, cotton yield reduction can be as high as 65%. The fun thing I like to say is if I give you all each a $100 bill and I ask you for $65 back, you're probably not going to like me after that. I would be pretty upset too. With that being said, some of the work that we've also done and kind of some of the work that I've done now with Dr. Culpepper in collaboration with him is we're also starting to see a little bit of a fiber quality issues here as well with the presence of palmer amaranth at different densities. One of the good things though, we're showing that the 70 to 100% control, we're really not seeing any yield difference there, so it's kind of a good news for our growers that there is a little bit of leeway. You may miss some plants here and there, and that's going to be okay. You're not going to see a huge yield hit there, but of course, if you're going to dip below 70% control, you're going to start seeing some pretty quick hits, and your yield's really going to suffer. Fiber quality aspect, it's one of the things that I kind of dived into my master's and now into my PhD some as well. Of course, you put more trash into that machine, you're going to get more trash out. It's pretty straightforward for the most part, but of course, that with some of what that trash is being pulled in, we're going to hope the gin's going to get it out, but obviously the likelihood that you're going to pepper that up and send it through into your bale at the very end of that ginning process is pretty high. I mean, it can only get so much out, or they're going to have to get really aggressive. You're going to see some other issues with fiber quality. So current control, I mean, obviously we've kind of got a few varieties here for herbicide programs. For current in season, for just targeting that one weed, we currently really only have John Deere See and Spray if you're trying to do spot spraying in that aspect. But of course, I don't think we may not all have that amount of money to be able to go out there and buy one of these brand new machines. That being said, of course, you got mechanical cultivation and discing. Some issues with that though. I mean, you're still running through there. You're burning more diesel. You're seeing a good bit of compaction. You're still disturbing the soil surface throughout the season. And manual hand weeding, of course, I always love to throw that in there. That one works. That one always works. But of course, it's time intensive and labor intensive. So depends. If you've got a good grad student like me that they tell you to go out there and go pull them up, I mean, it's always really helpful and really useful. But not everybody has that at their disposal. So if we're going to have palmer amaranth on our field, we're going to kind of hope it maybe looks something like this. That way when we take our tractor through that field, hopefully we're just going to kind of be able to make 1-2 passes there. We're going to be able to handle those weeds within the field. But let's be honest, they don't look like that. They look like this. Now it becomes a pain in the butt. We're not just running 2 simple passes. If we're going to effectively spot spray this, now we got to sit here and drive this tractor all the way around this field, wasting all this diesel. Likely, and obviously you can see here just between these, these simulated areas of weeds, now we're going to have probably a lot of herbicide spray that we're going to be wasting, but we're not going to be using unless you've kind of got some rate control or some section controls there. You're probably going to have some issues here, and you're going to be wasting some money out there, which nobody likes to do in a year like this when cotton's below 70 cents or around that 70-cent mark. Machine learning. This is something that was something scary to me when I first learned it. First coined, but the funny part is, been around for quite some time. 1952. I wasn't even a gleam in my father's eye in 1952, but this was originally coined back then. As you can see, a branch of artificial intelligence and computer science which focuses on the use of data algorithms to imitate the way that the humans learn and gradually improving its accuracy. Kind of the whole thing is your brain is a supercomputer. We think of supercomputers are the size of this room. That's not the case. You got one right up here between your eyes. But with that being said, the computers are doing a lot, actually are able now to do better than what our brains are able to do, but we're way more efficient in the size. Obviously I hope none of our brains are the size of this room. Maybe you think some of your hot-headed coworkers might be. But with that being said, that's kind of what we're getting to now. We're trying to actually mimic how the brain works and how it shoots signals between neurons, which is pretty interesting. Today though, we're just going to be focused on classification. It's just a small branch of it. And as you can see, it's a branch of machine learning where data images are sorted into predefined classes or groups. So I took some pictures and I presented these. This is all off of Google. Google has their own one. It's free. You can go in and play with this if you ever want to. It's like Google View API. It's kind of fun. So these are some pictures that I had. This was my grandfather and his friends on some motorcycles. I put that in. Google was able to go in and tell me it was seeing motorcycles, clothing, people, a top, meaning referring to a shirt or something like that. Next, of course, something really applicable to agriculture. Of course, we got a large tractor. This was actually at the ABAC unveiling the other day. And so it's identifying machines, tread, engineering, agricultural machinery, some pretty high. So it's thinking, okay, these weren't given to it before. So, it's not been trained on these, which is pretty interesting. Then let's look at a seed furrow. This was from a study that we did where we pulled that closing wheel off. It's thinking it could be anywhere between concrete, building material, soil. 70% between all three of those. I don't know about y'all. I don't hope to plant into concrete or any kind of building material, though I understand sometimes if it doesn't rain, it feels like concrete. So kind of something that shows us that there's still some issues here, that there's still some areas where the computer may not always need to be trusted. Like Dr. Porter was talking about, he may not fully trust that, Chat GPT, the answers it gave him. This is a great example of it. That being said, kind of a big area that we see a lot of, precision agriculture, a lot of people talk about is UAVs or drones. Kind of really been here big since 2016. They've been used for a variety of things. It's wild where we're going with them now. The big thing, they're now categorized by size, brands, functionality, flight mechanics, and then licenses required. Of course, you can have something small like this is what I use for my research, which we'll see here in a second. You've got some fixed wings. Some of these kind of very interesting the way that they work. And then you even have some of the big ones. Actually, our colleague here, Chance, is working with this one. This is our T40 with DJI. You doing it to do some spraying and spreading operations. Pretty cool. This one here is about the size of my hand. I can hold it in my hand pretty easy, pack it with me. We bring a whole dang enclosed trailer to move this thing around and take all the stuff with it. So that being said, it's always a fun thing. So why not just go out tomorrow and buy a drone and start flying it on your farm? Why not do it? I'm telling you all these great things about it. First off, does your farm even need that? Is that going to help you at all? Next, does the drone you need require anything additional? Of course, to fly that commercially, you're going to need a Part 107. That's going to take time. You're going to have to test and get that. Goodness gracious, we have got, like I said, we took an entire enclosed trailer to do our stuff. It is slap full of batteries, seeds, attachments, GPSs, weather stations, you name it. We had to get replacement props. One of the other students decided to hit a bird a few weeks before we did that. Thank goodness we were able to replace that. And then even some of these large ones require a Part 137 and then permits to even fly them. So again, there's some things you need to think about before you even throw these on your farm. That's a big deal. That's a big investment of your time and your money before you go into that, if you really need it on your farm. And then another thing to think about is tank size and battery life limits your mission length and will require several filling and battery change stops. We had it down to about a science. We were pretty good at how fast we were able to kind of pull batteries out, throw more seed in, take seed out. But it's going to take some dedicated staff to be able to deal with this, and you're going to have to sit out there and kind of babysit it to some degree. So how all do these four mix? That was kind of the big questions that we had. How do we use all these four things together? And we kind of came up with two big questions. How can object detection or classification be utilized in developing Palmer Amaranth weed maps? How do we understand where our weeds are in the field? And then how a UAS system can be utilized in handling Palmer Amaranth hotspots. Kind of interesting things we proposed, kind of, again, dealing with something that's a pretty new and very relevant technology for precision agriculture. So kind of got two projects that we're working through, and I'll kind of click through these because we're going to dive into each of these a little bit deeper in just a second. Kind of some simple things here. This first one up here at the ID, generating weed maps, understanding where those weeds are in our field. And then this bottom one here is how can we get through it very efficiently. Very, very simple, very easy, and we're going to dive through those here in just a second. The Palmer Amaranth, initially we worked through this. All we did is we took canopy pictures, this was about 50 foot with a 48 megapixel camera. It's pretty high resolution stuff. My hard drive is very filled up. Thank goodness we have OneDrive and I can dump a lot in there. Next, the part that my student workers hate and I also loathe is labeling all these. So in all those pictures that I took, we had to go in and draw little boxes around all those pigweeds. That's a real pain in the butt. But it's well worth it because then, you trash in, trash out, so we work really hard to do this well. We then are able to go in and train this model. That way we can use the computer to tell us where in those pictures those Palmer Amaranth are, which is pretty interesting going forward. Kind of get something like this where now we're able to show where the pigweed are within the field. And you can actually kind of see it here. I don't know the ones in the back can see it that well. We've even got plants in here that it missed. Okay, oh crap, that's not good, but we'll kind of You'll see it here in just a second. This initially started at Mississippi State, and now with USDA. This is kind of what I did before, was I took one field image and split it up. And the issue was we had 87% accuracy on there and precision, so we were able to repeat that about 80% of the time. It's pretty good. I mean, it's a B. It's a good B, but it still leaves you stressed, and you're probably going to have to take the final exam at the end of your semester, so that's not always fun. And obviously, if we're going to put this out on a field for growers, we don't want to be 87% accurate. We want to be much higher than that. The way we're really handling this issue. So we were able to work with Dr. Culpepper again, kind of at you with that work with fiber quality, and we were able to take more pictures this season throughout this field, and we were able to take it all throughout the season. So hopefully we're going to get pictures of pigweed when they're really small as well as very large. That way, you know, we can hopefully understand where they are at any growth stage within cotton. And the nice thing is, the way that I work this algorithm is I was just identifying pigweed, so hopefully this will be able to be used eventually through any crop, as long as it's, you know, the plant structure isn't super similar to how pigweed looks. That's the one thing. You can't use something that looks similar or it's probably going to confuse them. So that second part, like I said, we're kind of, one of the interesting things, we're going to solve what I call the traveling salesman problem. So here, we're going to start at box 0. So we're going to use this as an example of all these 12 little boxes all need to be sprayed. All those need to be visited at some point. So we're going to start at 0. So let's see, Lance, you're in the back. We're starting at 0. Where do I go? Which polygon do I go to? Okay, so we're going to go to 1. So now we go to 1. Nick, you're also in the back. Now we're at 1. Where do we go? Do I go to 2? Do I go to 10? Do I go to 9? Do I go to 4? Which one do I go to next? Okay, so we're going to go to 10. That's actually, see, the good thing is y'all are really, really smart. See, Nick's already seen this a little bit, so he cheated. He knows where this goes. But with that being said, the interesting thing is my algorithm, they're actually right, which is good. But you know what? If you looked at this, I know I've sat here and stared at it sometimes like, is that the best? I don't know. So we're actually using the edges of this polygon, and I'm able to generate distances between all those and figure out what's the best way. The idea is, you know, that traveling salesman problem, you know, I'm a UPS driver in the middle of Christmas rush. You know, I've got, you know, umpteen packages in my truck, and I've got to get through all these houses. What's the best way I can get to all these houses with, you know, only visiting them one time? So with that being said, it was kind of an interesting thing, and once you see the arrows, you're like, I mean, that makes sense. That's easy. Yeah, of course it all makes sense. But you know what? We were at Plant Food the other day. They started at 0. They went to 2. Then they went over to 3 and then 4. And they were going backwards according to this, which, I mean, you can call it 6, 1, half a dozen. But maybe you get down here in this area where you've got these boxes of 10, 12, 11, and 9. How do you, what's the best way to get through those? You kind of get some areas that are kind of can be confusing pretty quick.
And you're going on the assumption that you can spray all that on one battery.
Exactly.
Stop in the middle and go back.
And so that's the other thing that hopefully this is kind of understanding is that, you know, we've got a very limited tank size and battery life on here. I mean, we're maybe getting 15 minutes out of a battery. I mean, that's good. But now, you know, I mean, this is 160, I think it's 170-ish acre pivot right there, or farmed area in that pivot. There's no way you're going to be able to do that in 15 minutes, obviously. I mean, each of these boxes may take you 10 minutes each. So that's kind of one of the aspects of we got to be efficient with where we're going. One of the nice things, at least about that drone that we're using with Chance, is he's able to kind of go between these boxes, but we need to know which boxes to go and, you know, in which order to go in. Kind of an interesting thing. And thank you. That's, I mean, exactly. So kind of like I said, it started solving the traveling salesman problem. And actually, we're working with Mississippi State on this. Kind of nice to get some work with another university. This was, again, this is all where it started. I just generated random little points throughout that box. And again, once you see the arrows, it all makes sense. But then you get down in an area like this and trying to figure out which way to go and which manner to go in, it can be a little confusing. You can sit there and really, I've sat there and second guessed myself a few times looking at it, making sure that it's telling me, you know, something correct. So with that being said, we're now pulling in shape files and able to route through those. And kind of an interesting thing now, and because obviously no one likes doing code. I mean, I don't exactly love it some days, and it makes me kind of want to throw a computer here and there. So now I'm kind of working on a dashboard, so that way we can kind of make this a more streamlined, a little more consumable to everybody. And we're going to try to figure out with them whether or not we're going to put this as like a software, if we're going to pull this in on a website itself. So kind of somewhere where we're going with it. So with that being said, like I said, we're kind of going through now, looking at some images. Again, my student worker, Jarrett, he's probably not loving me at the moment because he's having to draw a bunch, like thousands of boxes around things, but I'm helping him. I'm trying to help him as well. And then once we're able to get those done, we're then going to use that to train the algorithm a little bit more because, of course, that A7, again, it was good. It was promising, but it needs a lot of work if we're going to put this out for growers to use because we want y'all to be confident in what we're doing. Project 2, like I said, currently using a single data set, just using that little field that I had that I worked in my master's, and I'm just drawing just square boxes. I mean, I think we all understand the world out there isn't square and isn't always nicely distributed. So I'm going to kind of play with this some more going forward, maybe make some weirder shapes, see what it says. Of course, we got to make it flyable, but with that, again, also kind of looking into some other methods for optimization. I want y'all to have options out there, whatever's going to work best for you. Kind of hopefully, eventually in that dashboard to be able to compare them as well. You got to see your different options out there. In summary, so those questions I put up: can object detection be used to develop Palmer Amaranth weed maps? We're saying yes. We're saying yes at the moment. We can. You can really use these computers to do some really cool things. And I think we can make this where it can be utilized on farm with relative ease, hopefully. And again, working through a lot of those issues that we see with the UAVs and the short battery life, the small tanks and whatnot, how can we handle those? An efficient or optimized route on a drone platform is highly necessary when visiting multiple target areas. So we're working through that right now to solve that issue for y'all. That was a super condensed version of that. I know I went at 20. I got 2 minutes. Heck yeah. Of course, I always love to thank our folks here at UGA, Dr. Culpepper's lab, our lab as well, my advisor at Mississippi State, and we have a great crew over at USDA who's also kind of helped us with this as well. They're absolutely fantastic. So, again, that was really fast, I know. But I'm trying to keep you all on time. I'm not going to be one of those who's going to hold y'all over and make y'all miss the break. That's not the fun, no one wants that. So, y'all, we got some time, a little bit of time for questions, and I'll, of course, be here all day, so y'all can always come back and come talk to us. So, thank y'all.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
So, I'm not really paying attention to the draw space so much, but
Of course.
For this to really work, to me, it looks like it needs to be autonomous. Whereas now the current model is you got to have this fancy trailer with a loud generator, and you got to sit up there in the heat all day and recharge batteries and all that.
So at the moment, yeah.
So is a little flying machine the only thing that is really being looked at, or are there things that are on the ground that can run off diesel fuel that you could leave in the field the night before and the next morning it could go out there and do its stuff?
So yes, sir. Actually, we've got Dr. Raines is doing a lot of work in that kind of weed identification, and he's actually got robots that's got multiple platforms that look at what's there and decides which method of control it can use. I think it's got like a laser, a string trimmer, and a sprayer on it. Also, we're also working with, I think, Solix, if I remember correctly. It's an autonomous robot that we have the field boundary on it, and it just it's kind of weird. It wanders the field and it goes throughout it, and it's got cameras all over, and it can spray on just the weeds that it has to look at as well. So maybe eventually working through those. All of those at the moment I think are all electric, but the idea eventually, hopefully, you could, yes, sir, go into and start using some kind of, powered unit as opposed to just like an aerial unit. But so that is a possibility. I know we're kind of working through it, that swarm idea in different platforms.
Well, the whole thing to me is that it needs to be autonomous. I don't need to go there babysitting all day.
Well,
not practical.
so
It
you.
just becomes another job.
Exactly. So that's very true. And kind of one of the interesting things, at least with the mapping aspect of it, that I kind of want to point out with that is hopefully that imagery that you're taking, maybe you can utilize that in other ways as well. You can use that to do a little bit of crop scouting. You're starting to look at, at the very least, you're now getting a live image, or you're getting a that day image of your field that you're looking at. Now you can be like, okay, I'm starting to see maybe, you're starting to see some issues, or you can see it visually that way, as opposed to maybe trying to look at either satellite or just I'm going to stand on top of my truck and try to look at it. And, so hopefully that also can be used in other areas as well. But
I know this is probably more of an FAA thing, but from what you see, is there a possibility for autonomous flying things, or is there always going to have to be somebody with all these?
So currently there is options, and actually out at the 40 farm that we partner at with ABAC, they've actually got a unit to where you can, I think, Nick, you can sit in your office and deploy it, right? and he can sit in his office, and it's, it's over at, it's off of Carpenter, and he can sit there, deploy it, it'll go up and fly a mission autonomously, and it runs it. Now, of course, that takes permits, and that takes some infrastructure that you got to put in there. It's got its own fancy station and everything, so that does take an initial investment. But yes, there are options out there right now for that. I don't think they're pushing it super heavy, and obviously we're not seeing, it being used very heavily at the moment, but we're getting there.
People are looking at it.
I'm not saying we've opened a box that we can't close, but we definitely are, we've opened up this technology now where we need to work more in.
I don't know what session he's talking in, but I saw Leo Bastos down here too, and he's got one in Athens also. So we got one here and one in Athens. I don't know 100% what they're doing with it. It's on Iron Horse Farm up there. It's like behind the new shop, is where theirs is at. And ours, like you just said, is out at the ABAC Data Farm, like right behind that shop out there. So, yeah.
But it's just stationed there like doing its own thing. Or
Yep. And so like Nick can go in and,
out in the field or twice a week.
yep, you just,
You can fly it manually or set it on demand flight, or you can program a route in and set it on a schedule, so it'll deploy, depending weather conditions, it'll go out and fly it, and when it lands, it'll upload the images to the site and send you an email. And then you
So.
do it.
so we're getting, yeah, so I'm gonna say we're getting there. We're just not there yet, probably on the commercial
I mean,
aspect.
we did a
and
lot.
get-
This is off topic, but
Yeah.
we had a precision ag session at Fruit and Veg a couple weeks ago, and the first day was like innovations in industry. And there's a lot of companies that are trying to look at continual life robots out in the field. And there's different variations of those, right? There's a lot of different ones. Like you said, we've got two Soltech robots here that's supposed to be a 24/7 robot. It's it
Solar,
recharges. It's got solar panels on it, recharges during the day, it goes out. It's mainly spraying, but it has other opportunities, got a bunch of cameras and stuff on it for
If
scouting.
it's out for pigs at night, let me know when there's.
You know what, you
Hey.
just go,
And then in the daytime, it could be looking for pigweed.
you just mount a machine gun on it, why not?
Yeah.
Just go ahead and arm it. All right,
Yeah.
you know,
So,
just kidding, don't do that.
but perfect.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank
All right, I
y'all.
think we're out of time.